Hi, I'm Meredith Bell, President of Performance Support Systems, and I want to welcome you to an interview with, of course, one of my favorite people and authors, Mark Goulston. Mark, welcome to my interview here, and I want to especially say it sounds strange, I guess, because our topic is suicide and suicide prevention. And to say I'm excited about talking about it sounds a little weird. However, knowing you as I do and knowing the thought that you've given to this and the focus and light you're now shining on this, I really am excited to bring people to you around this very important topic because it's something you have vast experience in through all of your years of counseling people who were severely depressed, considering suicide, and yet you have a gift, a talent, skills that you've honed over the years that give you a unique perspective on this topic and really how to bring hope and light to others about this. So welcome, and I'm so glad to have you with me to talk about this today.
Well, you always bring out the best in me. You bring out beyond the best in me. I'm not even as good as the best that you bring out of me. So I'm always glad to be back with you, Meredith.
Oh, well, thank you, Mark. I know that you have an interesting story to share that's sort of the background to this, of how you came to have the passion that you do today about this. Why don't we start off with you talking about that?
Absolutely. Something that I'll preface it with is when I give presentations, and this is out of context, including a presentation that I gave in Moscow to 450 managers from the Russian Federation, I will often ask the audience to raise their hand if any of them have ever known of someone who committed suicide or known someone personally who committed suicide from their communities, their church, their synagogue, their college, their high school, elementary school, their companies, employees, children of employees, spouses of employees. So when you do that, everyone in the audience raises their hand. And I will tell you, when everybody raises their hand in answer to that question, you can feel the whole audience flexes into, we don't think about this, but there's some things that are probably more important than business. Also, to add to that, someone sent me a graphic, which I'll send you, and this was really startling, but not surprising. And it's a graphic that shows attempted suicides over the past, I think in 2016, of various demographics. And in 2016, 1 out of 50 teens or adults between the ages of 18 and 25 attempted suicide, 1 out of 50. So that means in a classroom of 25 people in high school or college, 1 out of every 2 classes has attempted suicide. And you don't hear about that because what you hear about is the ones who committed suicide. And it was startling. But the backstory to this is I started out as a psychiatrist, and one of my focuses was death and dying, which includes suicide. And I seemed to develop this ability to get through to suicidal people. And I did it kind of one-on-one. And the challenge was that after doing it for 30 years, I got worn out. I wasn't depressed by it. I was profoundly saddened by it. And I think what helped people give up their hopelessness is that when I was with them, they felt by me. I wasn't giving them solutions or advice. I was basically looking into their eyes, looking for the pain and the discouragement, and basically saying, I'm going to keep you company there as long as it takes. And, if we come up with some solutions or advice, or you want any of that, we'll come up with it. But I just don't want you to be alone there. Would that be okay? And no one was saying that to them, and they just start crying. And I can tell you, Meredith, that as soon as they started to cry, I could feel the hopelessness let up. And what happened though is it wasn't scalable. So it had to be me.
Right.
And after doing it for 30 years, I just couldn't do it anymore. And so I've been writing books since 1996. And so I've shifted more into the business world because, the business world is more exciting, more fun, people focused on success, people actually doing things, getting better. And I focused on helping people do that. But what was always haunting me was people killing themselves and having some way to reach them. In fact, when I shared with people how successful or effective I was, they said, "Mark, that's God's work." And I said, "But I don't have God's stamina." And but what's interesting is over the last 15 years, people have been saying to me about a lot of my work in business, they say, "Mark, you're not scalable. You have to come up with a process that other people can follow to get the results that you help them get." And so, and I write a syndicated column that goes to business journals. If you go to bizjournals.com, you'll find them because I give out my intellectual property and all the steps. And I think I have 55 columns now. And
well, I want to reinforce that. BizJournal.
BizJournals.
Journals, plural.com.
And just do a search, bizjournals.com, Goulston. And so taking that to heart, that, I have to give people step-by-step ways to be successful in their marketing, leadership, sales. But I guess there's an anecdote that I like to share because I'm not Abraham Lincoln, but it's an anecdote about Abraham Lincoln. And apparently he was on some journey and he rode by a horse that was stuck in a ditch. And he rode about a mile past it. And then he stopped and turned around and he went back to the horse to help it out. And when people in his entourage said, "President Lincoln, why did you do that?" He said, "I couldn't get the pain of the horse out of my head." And so, as I read about suicide, 22 veterans a day kill themselves. So that's always been in the back of my mind, but I never had an algorithm. I never had a thing that people could follow until now.
Oh, wow.
And I'll tell you what's fascinating. Because as I said at the beginning, it's amazing how many people know of someone who's killed themselves. And I'll tell you, when you find out about it in a company, even a big company or a college or a school, it's the news of it spreads like wildfire. Plus, imagine the family and the friends or the people who thought, I was worried and I didn't do anything. So it's a huge, huge problem. And so, but finding a way to, and the mission is called Suicide from the Inside Out, an empathic approach to I Just Want to Die.
Well, I have a question for you. I love the name of that. What you're putting together, this algorithm, and I assume it's going to take the form of a program that you can tell us more about. Is this for the person who's considering it, or the family or friends, or both groups?
It's for everyone. It's for everyone. It's a way for the person who's feeling suicidal to talk their way through it and get other people to understand. And it's a way for people around the person who's feeling suicidal to talk to them and with them. Because here's a observation. And I think this is what's increasing the rise of suicide. And so people in technology, you won't want to hear this, but you need to hear this. Cortisol, I'm a neuroscientist, so cortisol is related to stress.
Right.
And when cortisol goes up to a certain point, you can have what I call cortisol deafness and blindness, and you can't think, because when it goes really high, all you focus on is how do you get out of the distress. And there's something that coincides with your cortisol and stress going way up to the point of distress, and that's something called an amygdala hijack. And an amygdala is part of our middle emotional brain, and when the stress and cortisol goes way high, what happens is our amygdala hijacks us away from being able to think, and we go into fight or flight mode. And the antidote to high cortisol is oxytocin. So oxytocin goes up when we feel close and bonded to someone. So this may explain why men live less than women. And the reason is that when stress goes up and cortisol goes up, men withdraw. They want to be left alone, and then they come up with an answer, and they come back, and it's take the hill. I've figured out how to solve it, and I'm going to do that. And that may be good in mastering the stress, but it's not good for blood pressure, heart disease, strokes, and whatnot, because it's cortisol going over to adrenaline.
Mm-hmm.
Now, women spontaneously know that if they talk and they can feel less alone, if they can feel felt, oxytocin goes up, cortisol goes down. And see, what happens is when cortisol goes down, your brain calms itself, your amygdala settles down, you can think clearly.
Mm-hmm.
And, for all you guys out there who this sounds like a relationship not too far from you, is one of the reasons that many spouses, especially women, don't want a solution from you, is that if they can just get stuff off their chest, have the oxytocin go up, feel less alone, have the cortisol go down, they will come up with the solutions. They don't want your solution and advice. What they want is they want to feel close, because internally, when their oxytocin goes up, their cortisol goes down. So I understand all this stuff, and I think, by the way, the neuroscience of it is going to help make a more compelling case about it, as opposed to all the people that are purely left brain that say, I know I should listen better, but why can't they just follow my advice? Well, because your advice is your way to get away from the discomfort of being with someone who's depressed, anxious, maybe feeling suicidal. And what happens is it translates to the other person that you just want to give them something and wash your hands of them and think to yourself, well, I've helped them. No, you haven't helped them. What you've done is you've given them a solution to get away from having to feel any of their feelings. But see, what helped me to cause people to give up their suicidality is they felt less alone. So I can remember towards the end of my doing this, and by the way, I appreciate people might want to reach out to me. I've retired as a doctor. I don't have a license because I wasn't keeping up on all the medication stuff and the HIPAA stuff, because that's not the kind of practice I had. And so I'm not doing this one-on-one. And you're going to have to cut me some slack as I develop this course in training. Actually, lynda.com I'm going to be speaking to because they want to do something on depression in the workplace. And there's a big, if we do a course together, we're going to do a big component on suicide. And so, but I'm launching the announcement of this. But as I was saying, one of the things that helped people become less suicidal, and you can actually try this with people who you're worried about. So imagine if someone's really feeling down, and they know and you know that they're feeling down. And see, a clinical approach would be, tell me about what brings you in here. And how's that affecting your mind, and how's your sleep? How's your appetite? Checking boxes. But what I would do is knowing where they were at, I'd be able to look into their eyes like this, and I'd say, and this might be the first thing I'd say to them, how awful does it get in there at its worst? They go, what? I'd say, how awful does it get in there at its worst? And they'd flinch because that's a question they're not used to. And then one of the things when I would connect with them, because I knew advice or solutions wouldn't work because that's what had been given them by the 5 previous psychiatrists, psychologists, I'd say, would it be okay if I don't give you any advice or solutions that you're not going to follow and then feel guilty when you come back and have to tell me why you didn't do it, and then have your parents grill you on, well, why aren't you doing what the doctor told you? Would it be okay if I didn't give you any of the advice or solution, get you into that dilemma? And they look at me and they go, yeah.
I bet inside they were going, oh, finally.
Exactly. Exactly. So
I can imagine just not their bodies relaxing, but their minds relaxing, because they're not going to be expected to hear and retain something that, because of that probably amygdala hijack they've got going on, they couldn't absorb it anyway. I think that's a thing a lot of people forget, is just, and I've been guilty of it myself, not with someone suicidal, but just someone in a bad place, and being too quick to want to jump in and fix and offer solutions when, as you said, they don't want to just be understood. They want to be felt. And that's very different than just being present with them. It's sort of like an attempt, because I've listened to so many examples and stories that you've shared. And one of the things that always impresses me is your attempt to kind of get inside their head with them and experience what it is that they're experiencing, and somehow being able to communicate to them that you get where they are, either by a simple observation statement you make or a question you ask that, as you just showed, has the effect of calming them down, lowering their defenses, building trust, and making them willing to open up. And I think when you're talking about that, friends and family involved with someone who's severely depressed, trying to do that, I'm just imagining myself in that position, Mark, and I'm thinking one of their questions to you might be, so if I ask this initial question or make this initial statement, and then they start opening up and telling me things, and I don't know what to do with it, where do I go from there?
Well, it's interesting because you're tracking perfectly. So if we use the cortisol, oxytocin, reciprocal thing. So imagine they're all cortisoled up. They've been directed to me, and they've seen 5 other people. And so they're all cortisoled up. There's no oxytocin because they've been treated clinically. One of the other things that suicidal people feel, and I have if you go to my Twitter account at Mark Goulston, MarkGoulston, the top tweet that I have up there is, have you known of or known anyone personally who's committed suicide in your community, your church, or high school, whatever? And it's gone kind of viral. And if you read the comments, and
I have.
Oh yeah, they're unbelievable. My husband, my brother, my son, my mother last week, my nephew on his wedding day. It goes on and on. So I'm directing them to connect with each other. But if you imagine, there's that person, and they're all sort of like this, and they feel they're a burden, which adds their cortisol. They feel they're a burden to you. And so when you say, I'm not going to give you any advice, what they're thinking is, wow, he's giving me something I can't fail at, and I fail at everything. So you're exactly right. When you say that, they go, ah. So the cortisol starts to come down. But then what I say to them is, so if it's okay with you, what I'm going to do is and I look into their eyes, And you can do this as a parent or whatever. And it'll be hard at first, but if you look into their eyes for hurt, pain, fear, anger, and discouragement, just look for that. You'll see it. And so what I then say to them, what I'm going to do instead, when I look in their eyes, is I'm going to find you wherever you are and keep you company there as long as it takes, because you've been there at 3 a.m. too many times, and you curse the day when at 7 a.m. you were still alive. Is any of that true? And they go, and they just start to cry. And I say, yeah, I thought it might be, and I just don't want you to be there alone. Now, some people are taking this literally. Well, what do you mean keep them company? I'm telling you, you just make that connection. They're so starved to not feel alone that they can take in that conversation and they can replay it over and over and over again. I mean, what's fascinating is, I'm relatively famous, I guess, in the world, and I can't quite keep it up. But when I go into that Twitter feed, and I'll try and do it, but again, it's tough to keep up. But when I then comment back to someone, all I have to say is, "That's awful. I'm so sorry. Take care." Sometimes people say, "My God, a famous person spoke to me."
Yes.
A somebody spoke to me who's a nobody. And I am telling you, we all have a little bit of somebody that we can share with people who are feeling like nobodies. We can smile at homeless people. We can give them a bag of whatever, grain or nuts or something, instead of money where they're going to go drink it, and say, here, here's a little food. I hope it helps you feel better today. And that's why I advise people to walk around with 20 bags of nuts and grains. So when you see someone like that, you can go there, look in their eyes and say, here, maybe this will help if you're hungry. Take care.
Well, you're bringing up something without directly saying it that I think is so critical. Again, trying to put myself in the shoes of a family or friend who has someone they're concerned about, rather than being concerned about memorizing some script, or having this formula. There's a process, maybe is a better word, that they can use in terms of being with the person and not stressing, because we don't want their cortisol to go through the roof either if they're trying to be helpful, because they won't be able to relax and be there for the person. So if they can, just some general principles in terms of maybe asking yourself before you even speak, how can I be helpful to this person? How can I help reduce their stress by not asking questions that feel like an inquisition, but asking a question that feels safe, or making a comment that helps them feel I'm with you, I'm next to you, as opposed to against you, or, it's helping them feel what you have described as I'm here with you, walking next to you in your pain, and getting them to be willing to open up a little bit about what that feels like and looks like. So those of us trying to be helpful really get a sense of what that's like. You've worked with so many patients that you really have all those years and experiences that you're bringing to this, whereas someone else has that one person that's so important to them, and most likely an emotional connection with them in terms of a close relationship, whether it's at work or at home. So
I'll give you, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the idea of people relaxing into this in terms of how to be a helper to someone else, I think is an important aspect of being effective with them.
Well, there's a saying, I think it's from the Bible, where there's a will, there's a way. And actually, in practicality, it's the reverse of that. Where there is a way that is doable by regular people, people find the will to try it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll give you a taste of, the training and the algorithm that people can use immediately. But as I said, what I'm looking for, by the way, if people get this, is this is going to be a book, a training course, a mission, a foundation. And what I'm looking for is financial support so I can focus 100% of my time on this, because as I said, 22 veterans are killing themselves every day. And so if people know, actually people are introducing me, by the way, to heads of foundations and CEOs who unfortunately have had a family member kill themselves. So if you can make introductions like that, I'll be able to get this out even quicker.
Great.
But here's a taste of something you can use, sort of the way that'll give you the will. So if you think, and this is the way my mind thinks, and that's why I think it's an empathic connection versus a clinical connection. So if you think that as we go through life, and we seem to be heading towards a goal and it's working well, we feel pretty well, and we feel, what we're heading towards, what we think, what we feel, how we act, it's all lined up and it's pretty neat. But then if that goal is taken away, if it's taken away permanently, you get fired from a job you always thought you had, someone asks you for a divorce, someone tragically in your family that you should have paid more attention to kills themselves. What happens is that causes stress. And what stress is, it means that an expectation that you had, that you were living into, is suddenly taken away. Now, initially, when we're feeling stress, we can still stay sort of focused and consider alternatives. But if the pain of that stress starts to mount, we shift our focus because it becomes distress. And we shift our focus to alleviating the distress. And that's where we can start drinking. That's where we can start eating too much. That's where we can start calling in sick. So as you're speaking to someone, if you are following what I'm getting at, and you see they're not in a good way, the question you can say to them is, something you were expecting to happen didn't, or backfired, and you're having a real tough time with it. What might that be? And they're going to talk about it. And then as they talk about it, you can employ some of the approaches from Just Listen behind me, which goes deeper. And these are called conversation deepeners when you want to help people get it off their chest. If they get it off their chest and you don't give them solutions, they feel felt, they calm down. So if they tell you what happened, they're likely to use some sort of exaggeration, hyperbole. It was just awful. It was horrible. Or they'll raise their voice and I don't know what to do. And what you can do at that point is they share that immediate thing and getting stuff off their chest. And what you can say is, say more about the awful. What? Yeah. So tune in on that word, notice that word, and they're going to talk more about that. Mm-hmm. And then as they talk about that, what you can talk about is that they shifted or they're about to shift to distress, they're looking for ways to deal with it. And so if you track with this and not rush them through it, the next thing you talk about is after it happened and you realized it wasn't a bad dream and the pain just started getting worse and worse and you couldn't sleep. And they'll start crying even as you're talking about this because you're tracking with them. They're feeling less alone. Say, what did you try to make the pain go away? And then they'll start to talk about that. Now, I probably shouldn't admit it, but I always had a beer after work. Now I'm drinking a bottle of wine. And again, you don't rush in. You could say, and so what's that like? So you want them to start describing that moment. You want them to relive being there. Yeah, it just hurts so much, and I know I'm running into problems. And I say I can't drink another bottle of wine, but there it is in front of me. I open it, and I mean to have one sip, and pretty soon the whole bottle is gone. Oh, and so when you're doing that, what happens? Well, I'm sort of an autopilot. It doesn't help anything. But do you follow what I'm saying? You're tracking with them.
Oh, yeah.
And then another word, but this is just the taste of it because I have to put this in a course form. And then another word to use. So you talk to them about their stress, meaning something was taken away from them, their distress that caused so much pain that they're trying to kill it off by some means that doesn't really help them. And then another word which helps people to open up is to say, have you felt discouraged at all? What do you mean? Just discouraged, that you don't know if there's a way through it or out of it. And again, do you follow what I'm saying? These are empathically directed words.
Mm-hmm.
And then as they open up more and more, now a lot of people will say, but what am I going to do? If they say things, I think if you by Just Listen, which will help you stay aligned with people, or the follow-up book is something called Talking to Crazy, which is how to tune into people when they're acting irrationally. Instead of going like this, you lean into it. That's what Talking to Crazy is about. And what happens is, if you can notice as they're talking to you, instead of being a deer in the headlights of a car or wanting to run away, if you just look into their eyes, you're going to notice, and they may start crying. You may start crying out of your own compassion, but you're going to notice that they're lightening as they get stuff off their chest. And then you gradually move them through that. So, in the interest of time, and again, haven't fully developed this, even though I have all the steps. Can you see, Meredith, that if you have a conversation like that, that it's all, look, people are given sales training. A lot of people aren't given empathic training from the point of view of caring about the other people's feelings.
Mark, it totally makes sense. And I'm so glad you brought up your two books, because I was just thinking, what tools can we provide to people until you have your fully functional program, whatever form that ends up taking? And your two books really are remarkable at achieving what you were just describing. This idea of being able to be empathic with another person, because we don't have formal training in this area growing up and going through school or in the workplace, unless we've got a very enlightened leader who, shows the way. But in general, people don't know how to be with someone else in pain. And circling back to what you said at the very beginning, I think men probably have a tendency to do this more, but I think women can too. As mothers, we hate to see our children in pain, so we want to help solve their problems a lot of times. So this idea, though, instead of trying to avoid or offer solutions, your two books really are, I'm going to pitch them, a terrific handbook for giving specific not just tips, strategies, ways to do this. And one of the beauties of your writing is you give so many great examples, and stories. So people don't have to just, read about a concept that's vague. They really can crystallize what it looks like and how they can use it without being a trained professional, because most of us aren't. But I just can't say enough about both books, Just Listen and Talking to Crazy, even though that you don't have to be talking to someone who's literally crazy, just, as you said, not being rational at that moment. And anyone that is seriously depressed, or contemplating suicide really falls into that category because they have that amygdala hijack combined with the high cortisol levels that prevent them from being able to be rational, at that point. And the other thing I would recommend people do is subscribe to your podcast, Prism Letters, because you addressed, a specific letter written to you by someone who is either in jail or in prison based on one of your earlier books, Get Out of Your Own Way. And to me, so many of your insights there apply to this, how to be with other people in a way, because you're not just speaking to the letter writer. The insights that you share there are universal and apply to us in so many different relationships. So I just think your body of work to date offers lots of opportunities for people to get some insights that will, be helpful to them until your new work is ready. So that you already have so much. And I think having people follow you on Twitter is an excellent idea. I think just those who are suffering from severe depression or feeling suicidal, this idea of connecting with you, even on Twitter, is a way for them to feel less alone and to be able to seek other resources that could be helpful.
I'm directing people towards that. So if you go to @markgoulston.com, you'll see it. And it's a, am I depressed when I read them? I'm depressed, but the sadness, but I think the reaching out to each other it's creating oxytocin in the thread. And thanks, look, you're a great publicist for me. So Just Listen is really about how do you get people to open up, and people open up when you get them to talk about what's important to them, and then you listen to it and you care about that. That's how you get people to open up. Talking to crazy is about after you get people to open up, how do you lean into them and literally be side by side with them? So Just Listen is opening people up. But I think when you can be side by side with people and you pair with them, they connect with you. When I speak around the country, and one thing I'm hoping to do, and if people listen to this, I can do this even immediately, is to do a college tour of suicide from the inside out, an empathic approach to I just want to die, because it's happening on every major campus, is that one of the things, I just had one of those senior moments, Meredith. What were we just talking about?
You're talking about visiting campuses because, you were talking about the two books and the difference between them. Just Listen, getting people to open up, Talking to Crazy, leaning into them, and then you were describing college campuses as being a good place to visit because of the suicide rates there.
Right, and so thank you, because I was talking about despair, and so I've written that people commit suicide not just because they're depressed, because fortunately there's probably hundreds of millions, there's probably 1 billion people at least in the world that are depressed, but not all depressed people kill themselves. I think people kill despair. And if you break the word despair into DES-PAIR, it means feeling unpaired with hope, hopeless, that's a future, unpaired with worth, worthless, feel like a burden, unpaired with meaning, meaningless, pointless, useless, helpless, powerless. And see, when all of those line up, and you feel unpaired with all the reasons to be alive, you pair with death to take the pain away. And so that's why when someone pairs with you and you don't have to do anything and they feel your pain is just worth their keeping you company, it changes something in them. Mm-hmm. I'm going to share something personal. Did I ever share on one of our interviews this thing called the piano story?
Piano story? No. Mm-mm.
Well, this is kind of either icing on the cake, or I'll just blow the whole thing here. So here's piano story. At age 7, a young boy named Jimmy wasn't very happy in his life. And he'd come home from school, and in the home there was a grand piano down in the basement. And he'd come home from school because school wasn't happy and home wasn't happy. And he would crawl under the grand piano, and he would look up at the bottom of the grand piano like this, and he would just touch the brass pedals. And he might have been on his way to being on the spectrum, kind of like this. Like this.
Mm-hmm.
And then one day, a man in his late 30s comes down to the basement and sees him there. And the man doesn't say, what's going on? Are you okay? Are you sad? Are you angry at your family? How about going out and let's go buy you something? So the man instead, and Jimmy's like this. And so the man instead leans in, and Jimmy, and so Jimmy's looking up like this, and Jimmy doesn't want to make contact with people because Jimmy's not had a very good, successful relationship with people. And the man leans in and says, "Mind if I join you?" And Jimmy says, "Suit yourself." And the man crawls under the piano, and they're like, their legs are like this. And 3 months later, they're still under the piano. And Jimmy, is a little bit looking from the piano over to the sky, but then he looks back, and then he says to the guy, "Why are you here?" And the man, pun intended, in just the right empathic key, says, "You didn't look like you should be alone." And Jimmy goes, "Oh, okay." And then 3 months pass, and can you picture this in your mind's eye? And Jimmy is looking more and more at the guy, and less at the piano, and says, "Is this normal?" And the man says, "It's not usual." "What do you mean?" And Jimmy says, "Well, I come home from school, and I come under here, and I sit under this piano where nobody can see me, or nobody can hurt me. And is this normal?" And he says, "It's not usual." So Jimmy said, "Okay." And at this point, Jimmy's looking at the man and looking at the piano like this. And then 3 months pass. So it's a 9-month, like being born. And at 9 months, Jimmy looks at the man, and he's not looking at the piano anymore. He's looking at the man. He's trying to check him out. Is this guy a liar? Is this guy just, full of BS or something? And he looks at the man and he says, "Do I ever get better?" And the man looks at him and smiles and says, "Absolutely." And Jimmy says, "How do you know that?" And the man says, "Because I'm you and we got out." That boy under the piano was me. And that man next to him I think that's how I did therapy for a while. And so what I'm doing in this book is I'm recreating that. So people don't have to go under a piano or much worse. And so I'm so excited because I get to give people the steps.
And that's such a powerful story. I've got chills running down my back. But what you're really communicating there, one of the things is you've been there. You know how it feels.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought for a moment you were going to tell me about this story in episode 3 from Prison Letters, and I'm not going to go into the details of that, but you really opened up about some situations in your own life that were remarkable in terms of your willingness to be vulnerable and share some real pain points for you. And the fact is, I remember you had this, I forget if he was the dean or the professor, but someone at the university that believed in you and saw the potential. And I think that that's really what you're talking about here with what you want to bring to the world is giving people tools for being with someone else who's in pain so that you can help them alleviate that pain and recover and, you know, end up having hopefully a much happier, fulfilling life because of that one other person who was willing to be there for them.
I have a request of everyone who's watching this. It's a little self-serving. Just listen. Learn some of the tools and techniques, and then go to my Twitter feed with people who have been touched by suicide and go and empathize with them. You know, use what you learn and just listen to help the people that are just every day just sharing horrors. Help them feel less alone.
That's a wonderful request, Mark. I hope lots of people will take you up on that because what a difference we can each make with one person here, one person there. I so admire the work that you're taking on here. And it's interesting, it's a culmination of all the different things that you've been doing over the years through your work initially as a psychiatrist and then in the corporate world and with the books that you've written. You have, and I know you're going to do this because of who you are, just this synthesis of wisdom across the years that's going to benefit so many people. And I am going to be thinking about who I might be able to, you know, introduce you to that could make a difference in supporting this foundation, this enterprise that you're putting together that I think has the potential to make a huge positive impact on people's lives. So thank you.
Well,
Are there any other words or insights or ideas you'd like to share as we close?
Well, I think I mentioned it earlier, but if you're worried about someone, and instead of, there's something called the assumptive close in business. See, I'm a combination of things. And the assumptive close is when instead of really asking a direct question, you assume someone's going to buy from you, and you say, would you like that delivered by UPS or by such and such? So you assume it. So I'd like you to apply that to people in your life, at work, who you think are in a hard place. So instead of saying, what's going on, let's assume they're not in a good place. And maybe you can reach out to them and say, something's really bothering you, isn't it? And then invite them. One of my anecdotes, which I can end with, which is in Just Listen, and I think you're very familiar with it. I was having trouble getting an appointment with the CEO, and I met with him. And the last thing on his mind was speaking to me. And he was preoccupied. He was agitated. He's looking at stuff. And so after about 3 or 4 minutes, I said this to him. And again, I can do this because if I worked for a company, the company would say, you said what to a CEO? How dare you do that? So I have the luxury of being myself. And so I said to him, hey, how much time you got for me? And he goes like this. said, no, look at your schedule. How much time you got for me? And he's like this, and I can tell he wants to throw something. And he said, 20 minutes. And I looked at him and I said, there's something on your mind much more important than having a conversation with me. And I think what we're about to talk about is deserves your undivided attention, and you can't give it to me because there's something on your mind. So here's the deal. We're into minute 4. You've got 16 minutes. Let's reschedule this, or you can tell your assistant, don't ever let that jerk back in, but take the remaining 15 minutes and take care of what's on your mind, because it's not fair to other people. It's not fair to me. It's probably not fair to you. You know, and he looked at me, and I thought he was going to throw me out. And he looked at me, and his eyes got teary, and he said, you know something that people 20 yards from us don't know, because I'm private. My wife's having a biopsy, and it doesn't look good. And my wife's stronger than me, and she said, you go to work. But you're right, I'm not here. And then I looked at him and I said, just leave, go be with your wife, take care of stuff. You know, there's nothing more important than that. And then he looked at me, and he was like a former football player, and he went, and then he got centered, and he said, I'm not as strong as my wife, but I'm pretty strong. And you've got my undivided attention, and you've got your full 20 minutes. And it shouldn't surprise you, we've also got a lifelong relationship. So see, you can get through to people.
And you know, what you're really talking about too there is that awareness, because first you have to be paying attention to where they are and noticing when they can't be fully present. And that's
Absolutely.
when you can ask that question. But if you're so focused on yourself or solutions or other things, you won't even notice when someone's in a bad place. So that to me is a huge insight from that story. And I think it also very much applies to both sides of the table related to someone who's in a very bad place. And I think despair is really the right word there, looking for signs of despair within yourself or within others, so that it can be addressed through conversations that really can make a difference for them. Mark, I'm so excited about your new project, and I'm looking forward to helping you any way that I can. And certainly anyone who is watching this, please reach out to Mark on Twitter and let him know if you are aware of funding opportunities or other ways of supporting this really important work. So thank you again, Mark, for being with me today.
Well, thanks for being it. I feel honored to call myself your friend, Meredith.
Oh, well, thank you. I just love talking to you, and I love what you're doing in the world, and I appreciate having you as a friend too, Mark.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.